All right, Bob, this training is for you. This is Facility Scheduler by Melinda, just because you buttered me up. Otherwise, this never would have happened. So what I've got on my screen right now is the training sequence that I use. There is some orientation set up in this training sequence, but this is to be covered prior to training. This is usually what is covered very high level by the sales rep that gets the client involved with FS. So it's just an overview of the public view that's available. They can choose to buy it or not. It's a separate product. It does have an additional charge. How FS and AS connect, the FS request and approval process, the fact that there's paperless billing, paperless invoicing, that you can apply payments from the admin side, or you can include client payments using credit card. I do notice that they mention a little bit about the merchant account here if the clients don't currently have a merchant account. They go over how the custodians can log in to the system just to view the report that they need to know what's going on, and then some of the other reports that are there. Then when we get to the client for FS training, we usually start with this area here. You do want to have a little bit of a breakup between session 1 and session 2 because there is some homework that we give to the clients. So if the client would like to combine their trainings, it's best if you do one alone and then you can combine 2 and 3 or 4 and 5, etc. But today what I'm going to start with for you is the setups that we have for master admin permissions, account codes, the general settings, and then the breakdown of the buildings by type, by location type, and then the locations themselves with their approval routing. So I'm going to get into the FS program. The first screen that they'll see is this. They just need to log in. And then the first tab that we play around really is just the setups tab over here. So I'm going to go over to the setups, and then we have a long drop down here. We usually start with permissions because we want them to be able to set up their permissions first so that they know who's going to be using the system. When they're adding in a new person, they need to add in name, last name, email address, and then create their username and password. Phone number and middle name are optional. That's why they don't have the asterisk. And then they can set master editor permissions to give everything, or they can limit permissions to just the facilities calendar, to just the scheduling, etc. When they're setting up their custodians, the main setup is usually just giving them access to reports to the facility setup report so that custodians can log in, run a facility setup report that says this is what's going on in these locations, and they're able to see what they need to help out with. So that's kind of the restriction. When it talks about custodian view, that's the custodian view that it's talking about. But they can really restrict it to anything and everything they like. One of the setups that they can do here is show the entire building by default. When there's more than one building, they still have to select all of the buildings, but they can show all of the locations within that building right here. Okay, and then the next one that we have is the account codes. With the account codes, they're fairly easy to set up. They just have to put in the name, the code itself, and then they can choose to add in a description if they want to. That's optional. It's usually just if the short name isn't descriptive enough. Some clients will use account codes, others won't use account codes, so it really just depends on what the client wants to do. Most of the time what I see is clients will say, I need to talk to my business office first before we determine if we're going to use these or not. And then the finance people can usually say if they want to use it or not. There is an option that they can use this credit, the same code, to report the unused credits. So if, for example, they have auditorium rental as their account code, if somebody paid to use the auditorium and then at the end they didn't use it, so it ends up as a credit on their account, do you want it to be reported through this account code for the auditorium, or do you want a separate account code for unused credits and it just means it doesn't track it through here? Usually I see that they don't use it because they could end up using that credit towards another location, so you don't want it necessarily linked to the auditorium. But again, that is their decision. They can choose what they want to do or not. And then we get into the general settings. The general settings usually takes up a little bit of time because you do have to go through all of the different options that they have. If you feel that your client is pretty tech savvy and they can understand what's going on, you can just kind of do highlights for the different things that are different in FS and not fill it in for them. I find more often than not that I'm filling this out for the very first time for the clients. I help them put in their name, their address, If they are going to be charging sales tax, what their sales tax rate is. And I do just remind them that everything we put in general settings is just the broadest generic term that we have. So if their main building opens from 5 to 11:45, then they can set that here, and they can always reduce the time for a specific building or a specific location. All of the generic defaults that they set up here can always be overwritten when they're setting up a particular place or a particular building or location. They can put in when their fiscal year starts. Sorry. They can select their payment term if they want it due upon receipt, or if they want it due within 30 days, they can change that here. After they have a client that have permits in the system, if they come in and change this, they will have the option to just change it for everybody. If they don't check this off, then it will only apply to these, to anything that happens from that point forward. They can set up their default time zone. Then they can select their quarters for reporting periods. Most of the time, they leave it with the default, which is winter, spring, summer, fall. Some people like to change these dates. Some people like to set up in session and summer school. So it's just one reporting period for everything that goes on during the school year, and then another reporting period for summer. Others don't use these at all. So it's really for them to choose how they want to break them up. If they wanted to just change the dates, they can go into edit, where it gives them an option to change the name or the dates. And then they can set up their standard default contract language here. They can just copy paste from their contract language if they already have it. And then if they do change this after they have permits already in the system, it does give them some options here as well to see if this is going to apply to old contracts, new contracts, only to clients in the future, etc. If they want to add additional conditions to their contract, there is an other conditions box that they can set default text to here. They can also set some default text to show at the top of all of the automatic email notifications if they wanted to. Usually this is something like, thanks for choosing us for your facilities, and then their name or something like that. And then they can also limit their facilities requests beyond a certain date. So they can either set it so that all dates are bookable. And what I explained to them is you can have all dates bookable, but you're still going to get those requests. So you can choose to approve or deny. If you get somebody that's trying to book out 4 years in the future and that's just too far in advance for your brain to handle, then you can still deny the request even if you set this to all. If you only allow them to put it to a particular date, so maybe they're only allowed to book until the end of 2015 right now, the only issue I see with this is they would have to come in and update this date as they move forward in time. And then the second one, or sorry, the third one is how many days in advance from the current date. This is personally my favorite option because it limits the public's access and it goes up to 180 days. So you can say you have from today until 180 days into the future to book out our facilities. And then tomorrow it'll be one more day into the future, and so on and so forth. So they never really have to come back in and set this. So if they select the first or the last option, it's kind of a set it and forget it. If they select the middle option, they are going to have to come in and update it. And then you can choose if you want to activate a daily rate or not. If it's only always going to be hourly, you can leave that at no. And then it has two options for the CR program and for AS. If they want CR or AS to be able to save with conflicts, they can add that here. If they set it to yes, then they'll get conflict notifications. They'll just have to decide who takes precedent. And then if you set no, then they'll never be able to save with a conflict right there. And then in this area is where they can decide a couple of defaults for the other programs as well in regards to getting notifications. Do you want to get notifications from class registration? Do you want each new program in class registration to be a new client? Do you want to get the facilities request notifications, unsigned contract notifications? Most of the time what I recommend is that they get all the notifications for now, and then as they get more and more comfortable with the system, they can come in and check these off so that they're uncluttering their inboxes a little bit. And then this is where they can make the phone number required for adding or editing clients and requesters. Down below, you'll see a list of all of the admins that you've already added into the system. You can select one of them to be the contract signing authority. When you select that person, it will fill in their information down on the right-hand side. So we have Nathan in here. You will have to add in title because that doesn't add in. You can make the decision if you want this person to be the primary contact for all buildings and locations. So that will just default Nathan in to each of the new buildings that you create if you wanted to. If you're getting bounced back emails or automated messages, do you want that email to also go to somebody else? This is if you have a secretary who's just tracking, she can check up if an email address is incorrect or something. You can add in your default account code here. Any building or location that you don't put an account code to will default to this code. And then you can put in who signs the contract. Again, it's Nathan. You can put in a graphic of the signature or a logo of your district in here. You can put in the invoice or business office contact person information here. And then we have a couple of options for how people can request. The request form, do you want it to reserve the space as soon as it's submitted or only reserve the space after it's approved? The biggest difference here is that if two people try to book the same place at the same time, before you're able to go in and approve it, one of them is obviously going to be approved and one of them is going to be denied. If it reserves the space as soon as it's submitted, then the second person won't even know that it's available. You can require some fields for facility requests if you want, attendance, location, date, and time. And then when the requester is requesting to be a requester, I love how redundant that sounds even though it really isn't. But when the requester is requesting to become a requester, you can decide if they can immediately submit facility request forms or if you want to approve them first. Okay, you will have to approve all requesters, but if you want them to immediately be able to sign up for a facility, then you can do that here. You can show the Become a Requester on the facility request page. This is so that the public can sign up for themselves. If you remove that, then you will have to sign up all requesters as the admin. You can disable the setup and tear down column, and you can disable the insurance policy prompt if you want to here. I have seen this become very useful for clients that are really only using this internally, so they don't need insurance policies on file. So whenever a requester logs in, if their insurance policy isn't on file, it won't give them a pop-up saying, hey, we need your insurance. But again, up to you if you want to disable that or not. And then set up and tear down columns. When you disable this, it just means that the client is going to have to include their prep time into their main time. So if their activity goes from 3 to 5, and they know they need an hour to set up, they're going to have to book from 2 to 5 because they won't be able to put in their own setup and tear down times. As an admin, you'll still be able to put setup and tear down times if you need custodians to get in there, set up bleachers, chairs, etc. It's just disabling it for the public. And then you can just save your changes and you're done. So usually explaining all of those options to the client tends to get a little bit time consuming, so I do see that I spend a lot of time on general settings. I think I went pretty fast because I know you're an on-the-ball kind of guy and because you'll be able to pause and record and replay if you need to. So after general settings, we talk about building types, location types, and the locations themselves. So we go into the building types first, and what you want to let them know here is this is where they're going to put in the different buildings that they might have, such as a high school, an elementary, and a junior high, and that's what they want to do here. When I'm setting up a client and they have nothing in here, I usually set them up with at least one example because this is going to be their homework for the next session. I want to set them up with at least one real life example so they can put in the rest of their buildings before the next time we meet so we can make sure that they're entered in correctly. And then in the location types is where they're going to put the different types that they have available for the public to rent out. So even though they might have 4 different art rooms, they're just going to add an art room once here. They might have 3 different cafeterias or 10 different computer labs or 4 different gymnasiums. They just need to add it in once. And when they add it in, they put in the type of location. So what am I going to put in here? I'm going to put in a conference room because I don't have that. So I'm going to put in a conference room, and apparently I can't spell conference. You'll put in what your default capacity is, and again, you can always override this when you're adding in additional conference rooms. So you can either pick your largest or your smallest, and then when you're scheduling out the individual ones, you can change it. And you can put in what a default hourly rate is for this one. If you have a particular account code you want to use for a conference room, you can add it here, or if it just goes under facilities rental, you can use a facilities rental. You can also add equipment and extra charges from here, but since we haven't covered equipment and extra charges yet, I usually skip over it and wait until I've talked about equipment and extra charges to discuss those in more detail. So I'm just going to save and exit here. And now we have conference room on our books here, and it'll show us the capacity, the hourly rate. I can delete or I can edit the information right from this main screen. After they have the location type, then we get into the actual locations. When we get into the actual locations, this is where we will add the buildings first. You need to add the building first so that you can assign a particular location to a building. Since I already have buildings in here, I'm not going to add a building for you. I'm just going to add a location. This is where you select your building, and then you give the building name. So this is where you give it a specific name. And again, I can't spell conference. It's probably just built into me. I'll select conference room as my location type, and it's going to put in the defaults that I added before. Okay, but if this particular conference room has less capacity, I can always override here if I wanted to. I can decide if this is part of a larger space right here. When you're putting in a larger space, you have to be sure that you start with the largest space first so that each of the smaller spaces can be assigned here. The example that I always use for this is, you know how hotels have their huge ballrooms that they can partition off to make into smaller ballrooms? You want to save in your largest ballroom first and then save in your smaller ballroom second so you can assign them to a larger space. You can restrict who can request this. If you leave everything unchecked, then that means everybody can request it. If you limit it just to staff, then only the people that you set up as staff clients can request. Or you can limit it just to inside clients or inside departments, and only they will be able to book it. If you check off both of these, it just means that public won't be able to request it. It's only internal. Okay. You can put in a rate for setup and teardown if you need to. If there's a daily rate for this particular conference room, you can also add that in. And then this is where you can add in a picture of your conference room, and you can put in any information that you want requesters to be aware of. If there's additional charges that could apply for this particular location, they can add it in here. If there's different options that they can have, if they can have a buffet table set up, or if they can have a coffee maker set up, then you could also put that in there. You can also dedicate equipment and extra charges right from here for this particular location. Again, since I haven't discussed how to add in equipment and extra charges, I usually skip this until later. And so then I hit save right here. Once I've saved the location, then it will let me look at the other two tabs for availability and notification and approvals. On the availability tab, you can set a different time frame if you wanted to for this location. It shows the generic times that we set up in general settings, but if we wanted to change it, we can. Maybe this conference room is only available starting at 9 a.m. and the latest it can be booked is 9 p.m. So we can set that there for all days, or if it's going to be different on each day, maybe this room is not available on the weekends. So I can set it from 9 to 9 from Monday through Friday, and then I can set 5 a.m. to 11:45 and just say it's not available on those 2 days. So then I can just save and exit here if I wanted to make sure that it changes these or updates the items that I've checked and the times. And then I can go to notifications and approvals. In notifications and approvals, we have a couple of different options. They can set up one person to be the approver. And if it's just the primary contact for this building, they can check this off as well, and it'll be the primary contact. So I'm just going to say that it's myself. If it needs to go through a couple of different people, like maybe Nathan needs to approve first and then it can go to Melinda, I can set it up that way. The only thing they need to be aware of is it will have to go in that order. It'll go to Nathan first, and after Nathan approves, it will get to Melinda. However, if Melinda logs in, and since she is a second approver, she can override Nathan. And another additional option here is if you give master editor permissions to somebody, they will always be able to come in and override this. Okay, so if I have master editor permissions or Nathan has master editor permissions, he'll be able to just approve right from here. If you need to set somebody up just to be made aware of an activity that's going to happen, but they don't really need to approve, you can put their emails in here, and you can also decide how far in advance to the activity they will get that notification. In this case, they will only get notifications if the activity is approved. They will not be getting notifications if the activity isn't actually approved. Okay, so then I'll just save my approval here and go on. Yes, I want it to affect all permits. All right, so that covers locations, and that's where we end our first session, because what we want them to do is add in their buildings, location types, and locations, so that before we meet the second time, we are able to go over those for them. So I'll go back in here because I still have a little bit of time. And then training session number 2, the first thing you want to do before you have the training session is just check that they don't put any duplicate locations in. They don't have gymnasium at the high school twice or something like that. And if you do see any discrepancies, just kind of mention them at the beginning of the training, just to double check that they meant to add them that way, and they didn't just accidentally add in 2 locations. And then the rest of training session 2 takes us through a couple of different setups: the email messages, the use types, blackout dates, payment types and fees. This is where we talk about equipment and extra charges. And then we also talk about client price tiers, client notes, and the clients themselves. So when we get into the email messages, we're again just playing in the setup tab. Email messages shows us the automatic emails that can be sent out through the system during the different stages of the scheduling process. And I basically just read that little descriptor up here in a couple of different words, but that's what I do so that I can remember. It shows us the format email. They can customize this if they want it to sound different. If they don't like the word dear, they can change it to esteemed or anything that they want. They can update any of these items. They just need to try to stay away from the items in brackets so that the system can plug in the information that it needs. And it's a long list of different automatic messages that can go out that they can customize if they want to. After email messages, we talk about the use types. In the use types, what they can do is they can set up a different fee if it's going to be used for something different. And my best example there is a rehearsal. If I'm going to book out their theater because I'm a community theater group, during our rehearsals, I might be charged less than during the actual performance because I don't have an audience for all of the rehearsals. So in order to set that up, I just put in the name and how much of a discount they're going to get. So then when we get to the invoice screen, when we run them through an entire registration, they'll be able to put in what type of use it is to give them a discount on the price. If you needed to edit it for any reason, if you want to change what they're getting for a discount, you can change it here. Or if you want to label it something different, you can change it here. And you can also delete any right from this screen as well. So types of use, and then we have blackout dates. That's usually pretty self-explanatory, but with the blackout dates, what's different in FS is they can choose to black it out for an entire day or just for a time range, like if it's only going to not be available in the evening or in the daytime or something like that. And then they can disallow bookings completely by checking off this option, or they can allow the booking to actually happen and just let the user know that it's a special date and there might be something wrong with them scheduling this date. So for example, they pick Christmas, it'll just prompt them and say, hey, this is December 25th, it's Christmas, are you sure you want to book on this day? And let them change it if they want to. But they would also still be able to book it so that you as an admin would be able to determine if you want that booking to happen or not. But this is where they can put them all in. After the blackout dates, we have the payment types and fees. This is where they can set up what payments the admins can take and what payments the public can take. Usually public is just credit card, and then if they have certain fees for the different types of payments, they can add it in here. If they wanted to track those fees with a particular account code, they can also assign a particular account code here. Then we have equipment and extra charges. With equipment, it does have categories that you can set up first. if you set up the categories first, you really set up the categories in this area just by giving it a name. So you can give it computer labs equipment or something like that. You can assign it a particular account code if you need to, and then it's going to list all of your buildings that you have in the system so that you can put in who you need to notify for computer lab equipment at that particular school. So if Melinda is in charge, you can put in Melinda and her email. She's in charge of the equipment at this school, and you can assign a different person to each school for computer lab equipment. So then I'll just save and exit. After you have your category in there, then you can come over to the equipment list and add in new equipment here. So I'm going to add in a mouse. I'm going to assign it to the computer lab equipment. I can put an hourly fee or a flat fee, and I can assign a particular code to this one if I wanted to. I can decide if this equipment is able to be reserved. What this does is if I put in a quantity of 10 mice that are able to be used for the computer lab, once it gets booked out to 10, then nobody else can reserve it. And then if this is equipment that needs to be taxable, if tax is included in their charges, they can check that off here. Any additional notes can be added also. I'm just going to hit save and exit. I don't need to save and add another. So once I've added it to my list here, I can show the equipment using the alpha bar. I can search for a particular category, but then I can come over to the equipment tab and add it to a particular school. So if I wanted to, I will be able to select my school from the drop-down list here, and I will add more, and it's going to show me everything that I have available. So I added in mouse. I have 25 available at this particular school. So then I'll just hit save and exit, and now it's been assigned to this school. And that's really all you need to set up for equipment so that when you're going and you're setting up buildings or you're setting up location types or locations themselves, you can dedicate equipment to it now because it's already been assigned to that school. It's best if they set it up through here first and then assign it to the buildings. And then we have the extra charges area. In extra charges, they are able to add in any additional charges that they might add. With the extra charges, it's good to note that they can add extra charges to a facility at the beginning of a permit. Like as soon as the permit is submitted, they can add in extra charges that are always defaulted to that particular location. But they can also put in extra charges after the activity has happened. For example, if they trash the place and you need to get custodial overtime in there, you can add that to the permit after the fact. Usually it just gets added in additional fees so that the public is aware. If they leave it too messy, then they need to be sure that they're aware that overtime for the custodians might be applied. Okay. After the extra charges, we talk about client price tiers. Price tiers is where you can set up a discount for a particular group of people. So you can add in a new price tier, and we can say that this is politicians. If we ever let the politicians use our locations, we're going to have a specific price tier for politicians. And I like to use this example because I'm going to select it from the drop-down. It's going to show me all of my location types, and it's going to show me my current hourly price for them. So I can then put in a new hourly price for this group of politicians. I can put in a new flat rate, where I can put in a percentage off of the list price. If I put a percentage off of the list price, then I can put in 10%. So politicians are going to get a 10% discount for any of our hourly prices. Okay, and I can use this drop-down arrow to fill down my whole column. If I'm going to charge politicians more than I'm going to charge the regular Joe Blow in the public, then I can go to the hourly rate, and where our hourly rate is normally 20, I could say, no, politicians are going to pay 50 for the art room. They're going to pay 40 for the auditorium. For the ballroom, they're actually going to pay $250. So I can increase their rate with a particular price tier. It doesn't necessarily just have to be a discount. But they can set that for each of the locations and then be done. And I will just say the changes. Yes. Okay. So that covers client price tiers. Then you can add in some client notes. This is just attributes that you want to be able to track for the clients. You would be assigning these. They don't assign them to themselves. It's just internal for the admin. That's why we can have funny ones in training, like doesn't play well with others, which I know I stole from you, or this client is fun to drink beer with. Not sure if I stole that one from you, but I could have. And then last but not least, we have our clients area. This is where you can set up the clients themselves. So when you add in a new client, you'll be able to decide if they're an outside, inside, or staff. This is where your client notes show up. So you can select the ones that you want there. You can put in the client name, which is usually an organization right up here. And you can assign a client price here. So City Hall or something like that. They get the politician price tier, so some things are going to be paying more for. Address you can put in. If their insurance information is going to be added, you can put in when it expires and then upload the policy. You can choose if this client pays tax or not. You can put in their tax exempt number. You can also add in if they have a different default on their invoices. So even though in general settings we set due on receipt, maybe this particular client is going to have 45 days to pay. So we can always override those general settings when we will need to. You can decide if you're going to show the client's name in the public calendar or not. It always defaults to no, but you can set it to yes if you need to. And then you can change their online reservation setting. We set it to default that it only will reserve the space after they've been approved in general settings, but if for this particular client you want it to reserve as soon as it's submitted, you can change it here. And then you have the contact person information here. This is the actual physical person that will be making the requests. So this is where you would put in a person's name. You would need to add in their email. And it fills in my information because I'm built into this computer, but the format for phone number is not liked by FS just like that. It needs to have the parentheses and the dash in the middle. If somebody's information automatically populates like mine, all they have to do is click into the phone number box and it will change it to the right format so that they don't get an error after they're saving. You can decide if this person is the primary contact and a requester or if they're just a primary contact. But if you don't label at least one person a requester, then these boxes down here will always stay grayed out. Even if this is just the primary contact, since they can't make any requests, you won't be able to select anything down here. So you have to make them a requester. Then you can put in a PIN number for them, set up a username and password, and then you can make these decisions down here below. Do you want them to be able to see the FS calendar as soon as they log in? Can they edit their information except for price tier? They'll never be able to select their own discount. Do you want them to be able to see equipment when they are submitting a request? Do you want their payment history to be able to be seen by them? If this is a contact person with additional requesters, do you want the contact person to be able to see all of the other requests that requesters have made? And then if they're sharing to AS, if this is a client that you want to write over to AS, then you can allow it here and then select which AS you want it to show to. Since this is a politician group, I probably don't need them on my activity scheduler, so I can just check that off. Oops, but let me check off here. And then right here, we can add in additional routing approval if we need to that is specific to this client. So you can select somebody who needs to approve them here, and then it would go through client routing first and then location routing, or you can bypass location routing and just use your client routing. If you don't put anybody in here, then it's just going to use the location routing specific to the locations that they've requested. And then I will just save and exit. And it's going to send me an email saying, hey, this is your PIN number. But now we have that person in here, which is City Hall. Bob Jesse's the contact. And that gets us through client information. So that gets us through session 2. And then session 3 is how it links to AS and FS. But I'm going to have to cover that for you next time because I have to go to a training. But at least I got you one recording and you won't hate me. Talk to you later, Bob. Bye-bye.